Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires and the AI updates that Creative Assembly is looking to introduce for the campaign AI specifically. So they have this message on their forum. They will be launching a beta branch for Warhammer 3 on February the 13th, so tomorrow. It will allow people to provide feedback on the latest improvements to campaign AI. And basically allow them to refine them. And they'll run this beta for about 2 weeks initially, bringing it to a close around February the 26th. And it will be running on a modified version of the live game that you're already playing today. So this beta won't be used to test any additional upcoming changes to the wider game, like 6.1, which probably is going to be coming out at one point or another. And they'll also be opening a new subforum over on Total War forums to gather feedback on campaign AI fixes and improvements that they're looking to make, alongside the survey that will run throughout the beta that will invite you to share your feedback directly to us. Okay, so fair enough. They're looking for feedback. They're looking to get players giving them information on how this actually works. So what they're looking to change, campaign AI improvements over here. So, there are 3 topics which we're addressing with idle behaviors with this beta. So, one of the things that's been happening, especially in longer campaigns, but even in shorter campaigns, you can see a lot of situations when the AI has a lot of armies, but they're not doing anything with those armies. They're not using the actual resources that they have. They just kind of sit around for a good amount of time in some cases, especially if they're sitting next to another AI faction that also has a lot of armies close enough to them. So it's a question of proximity. So if you have one really powerful AI faction with a lot of armies on the border of another AI faction which also has a lot of armies in that location, you're probably going to see a lot of game of chicken, if you will. So query system tweaks to how the AI responds to agent systems. Aggression tweaks to AI aggression in more nuance. And faction potential tweaks to faction potential with a focus on AI to AI interactions under the shroud. And they do give information with regards to that. During the investigation of what's causing many cases of idleness, we discovered the fundamental problem with how the campaign AI detects foreign agents and how it reacts to them. There are 2 different mechanisms to detect foreign threats, a simple query and an influence map that shows the extent of every force range and strength of interaction with assets on the map. The problem they discovered, inside the campaign AI exists a separation between assets that move and those that do not. Movable assets include agents, armies, and navies, and several of the queries that the campaign AI uses to decide if it should use its available force is for tasks such as actively defending threatened territory, were incorrectly reacting to the presence of enemy agents. In practice, the campaign AI was prioritizing tasks of defense elements when enemy forces are present when any hostile agent was present. That is certainly really weird to read, though I think it makes some sense when I think about the various experiences I've had. So how will this will affect the game? It means an AI control faction will no longer immediately assume defensive posture and concentrate forces near or in settlements whenever any hostile agent ventures into their territory. This should enable AI factions to use resources that previously went to the defensive response for other purposes, raiding enemy territories, concentrating forces to break through defended positions. And then there is the topic of aggression. So over the course of reading and investigating community feedback, the team decided we need to revisit how some campaign AI's top-level strategic decisions are made. We identified the component for desired attitude as a good starting point. The desired attitudes component basically tells the campaign AI how aggressive it should be towards rival factions. An oversimplified way of thinking about it is the AI is thinking, do I want to be friends with X or do I want to fight X? Our goals here are to promote more conflict between AI factions and improve the AI's decision-making when it comes to desired attitudes. So desired attitudes, decision-making improvement, we've tweaked how the AI assesses the strength of rival faction, which is certainly something you can abuse the heck out of. And then negative multipliers for unknown factions. Factions the AI is neither at war with nor aware of through alliances, either diplomatic interactions. We've tweaked these to make the desired attitudes for unknown factions trend negatively, incentivizing more warring between AI factions. So this means that the AI, when it encounters a faction that it hadn't met before, is more likely to be aggressive towards that faction. Assuming it makes sense for them to do so, hopefully. But that's my read on this specific statement. And then faction potential. Let me give you a very simple understanding of what I know about faction potential. So what faction potential does, whenever you start the campaign, there are certain factions, major factions, or playable factions, legendary lore factions, that are picked at random to have faction potential. I mean, every faction has faction potential, but some have far more than others. This is randomly selected at the beginning of the campaign. It gives them all kinds of buffs, including auto-resolve buffs. Basically, it means how likely one faction is to steamroll versus not doing necessarily as much. It is a bit annoying that it's randomized, because you never know what you're going to get. And it's annoying in the sense that sometimes it's good, and it creates an interesting campaign. Sometimes it just creates the worst kind of possible situation in the sense that it makes the campaign boring, because it buffs all the factions that you might be friends with, and the ones you're enemies with. Yeah, you get the idea, right? Anyway, so they've made tweaks to faction potential for the beta. A slight increase from a major AI faction strength versus minor AI factions, so legendary lord factions are going to be more powerful. A slight increase of faction potential weight in auto-resolve calculation. Yes, the AI cheats against each other based on faction potential, so keep that aspect in mind. Lower the minimum faction potential minor factions can have, so minor factions are going to be more easily wiped out. That's my read on it. Moderately increase the maximum faction potential bonus for AI factions under the Shroud. This allows higher potential factions to defeat and conquer lower potential factions faster, and small increase of base faction potential for all factions on all the difficulty levels. So some minor factions can end up being weaker, some will end up being stronger, all will have an increase, like major and minor factions. So some will end up being far weaker, others will end up being far more powerful, and kind of like on average, I guess, faction potential is just going to be increased. But basically, my read on this situation is that major factions will become more powerful. So how will this affect the game? Major factions will conquer minor factions faster and survive longer, decreasing the chance that they will be knocked out in the early game, and therefore resulting in more diplomatic interactions and battles with them for you during your playthrough. It will also increase AI faction interactions across the board, further building on the tweaks to idle AI and aggression above. So I guess we'll find out how all of this will play out with regards to a campaign. But I do have something to say on this. So I think these changes are good, because one of the problems that does happen is you play a campaign in the early game, and it depends on the kind of faction you're playing as. But you end up with these kind of like very idle factions that are not going to declare war on each other or you, and you're kind of in a situation where you're always in the driver's seat with regards to declarations of war. The problem with that is having that initiative grants you a significant amount of power and allows you to basically dominate the campaign map without a care in the world. And that results in a grind. This is one of the reasons why the most interesting portion of the campaign is the early game, because you know if you do very well in the early game, you'll dominate everything else. And actually, even if you don't do very well in the early game, that's still the most significant portion of the campaign map. Anyway, but let me talk about something that I do think CA should address on this issue, and it has to do with difficulty, and specifically battle difficulty and auto-resolve, and also to do with how the AI behaves on the campaign map based on your battle difficulty. Now over here, I have a turn 7 campaign as Miao Yen. I haven't done anything in this campaign, I just took Nanli on turn 1, just auto-resolve that. On Legendary, very hard difficulty, because you can do that as Miao Ying. And I have not engaged in diplomacy, I have not done anything. And this is on Legendary very hard battle difficulty. If we look at the campaign map, just using only one mod over here, toggle flag word, just to show the campaign map. We can see that Snitch has taken Kunlan. We can see that Greasus has wiped out the minor ogre factions. We can see Grimgor has done what you might expect him to do. This is how a campaign map should look, roughly, on turn 7 of your campaign. Like you can see that Warzag is over here about to start swarming, tic-tac-toe. We can see that Kairos has almost wiped out the minor Nurgle faction, though he's also traded Dawn's Light to them, because that's what Kairos Fate Weaver does. He is an annoying little troll. But for the most part, this is kind of what you expect. There are already some issues that we're noticing, because like Oxyatl can take this entire province by turn 3, really. So the fact that he's been sitting on turn 7 just recruiting stuff when there's literally nothing to oppose in here is a bit of a weird one. That does happen. Like, you do see factions just sitting on their ass for a decent amount of time, not doing stuff when they do have the opportunity to do stuff. And, you know, Rakarth just literally taking so many turns to not even conquer his initial province. That already is a problem. But here's the bigger issue of all of this. The issue is, this is on Legendary very hard. The Legendary aspect is not relevant here. Legendary essentially gives AI resources. As far as I know it, like as far as my experience shows it, Legendary difficulty gives the AI all kinds of resources. Battle difficulty is what's important. So AI stats affect stats in battle. But battle difficulty does 3 things. The fact that it does 3 different things is pretty annoying, and I don't think they should be tied to the same damn meter. But 1, it affects your auto-resolve. 2, what it really should be doing, and the only thing it should be doing, is that it affects the tactics the AI uses in battle. And 3, it actually affects AI aggressiveness. Or rather, it affects how the AI is using its resources on the campaign map. The higher you set the battle difficulty, the more aggressive the campaign AI is going to be with the resources it has, dependent on the resources it has. This is separate from the campaign difficulty, which determines how many resources the AI has. Now, it is a problem with regards to the idle AI already, in the sense that on this kind of difficulty, the AI is sitting around not doing as much. Like, what the hell is Yanbo doing here, right? You're already seeing this kind of weird behavior on Legendary very hard. But you gotta understand, the AI is far more aggressive with the resources it has on this kind of difficulty. Though I think that the Legendary difficulty with the mountains of cheats is certainly not benefiting the AI utilizing its resources, because the AI also will try not pick fights it can't win. So sometimes it won't declare war on factions because those factions supposedly have a lot of resources in their own right. So the AI is like, I'm not going to pick a risky fight. That's kind of what's happening as far as I am concerned. But yes, some things are reasonable over here. Other things, not necessarily so much. But this is on the highest level of aggression of the AI with the highest level of resources that they can get. But what happens when you play on a lower battle difficulty? And I know the vast majority of the player base does not play on Legendary very hard. But if you're concerned about the AI idling, I would recommend increasing the battle difficulty. Of course, the downside of that is the auto-resolve goes up by a significant amount, which means you may have to fight a lot more freaking battles manually, which aren't necessarily great. That's where auto-resolve mods do come in. That only affect you as the player. But still, let me just show what the difference is in the same campaign from very hard to normal. So, in the same campaign that I started, and I started this on Legendary very hard, so keep that aspect in mind, but then, before I ended turn 1, I set things to normal, so battle difficulty to normal. So let's take a look at the campaign map. I made no other decisions, nothing, like I've been sitting around here just recruiting a couple of units with meowing, that's all. Well, we can see that Snitch has taken Kumlan again, but we start seeing some differences. Like, for instance, Rhesus has not taken out the minor ogre factions. It might just seem 2 territories, but it's actually a big enough difference that it's worth mentioning, because it does start having a cascading effect later on in the campaign. Because if the AI is not taking the same amount of territory, with the same amount of resources, I should add, then it is having a weird effect. Now, he's probably just one turn away from being able to do that. Like, he'll just literally take the Valley of Horns and confederate this faction. But it gives you an idea of how battle difficulty can influence things. Now, you might just say, oh, that's a one-off. Other things are not necessarily so different. You would be correct. At this point in this campaign, there's not necessarily going to be the biggest differences in the campaign. Most things are going to be relatively the same in a lot of ways. But we can see a couple of differences. For instance, this may just have to do with the settlement that Kairos decided to trade to an AI faction, but we can see that Kairos has not taken all of his settlements in his initial province. We can also see that Warzak has not done the exact same things. He may have actually lost a battle, weirdly enough. Now, this is the same campaign, so the faction potential gets assigned at the beginning of the campaign. Maybe just a bit of RNG didn't work out in Warzak's favor over there, but he took 2 less settlements. That has a fairly substantial impact. Some things did work out for better, like Vorik taking Karagorund, but overall, what you're going to see on a lower difficulty, even this early on, is you're generally going to see AI factions doing less than they did before, or making different decisions. Sometimes it works for the better. For instance, like Alifanar, if you're playing on Legendary very hard, he'll probably avoid taking the Blacklight Tower and instead go for Karankar, because he thinks like, oh, the minor settlements are easier to take. So sometimes it doesn't necessarily end up favoring the AI to play on the highest difficulty, so lower in difficulty can be better sometimes. But as a broader picture, in general, you can kind of expect the AI to do less the lower the battle difficulty you're setting, regardless of what campaign difficulty you've set it on. And this is a problem. Now, I'm not going to say that the way the AI conducts its business on very hard is the best way, because I've seen the AI suicide itself, literally suicide itself in unwinnable battles, because it is too aggressive sometimes. But on lower difficulties, it is too passive. What I think Creative Assembly needs to do. Now, I don't know why exactly the AI behaves this way. All I can say is battle difficulty affects your auto-resolve versus the AI. It does affect their tactics, and from everything that I've observed playing campaigns, it does affect how aggressive they are on the campaign map, or how willing they are to use the resources in an aggressive fashion in the campaign. I don't think that's how it should work. And I think that trying to balance it across multiple difficulty levels is ridiculous. I also personally find it really annoying to have to fight a bunch more battles manually by setting this to very hard, when realistically the reason I want to set this to very hard is because I want the AI to actually build an empire. I don't want to fight every single freaking minor settlement in a campaign, suffice to say. This is especially an issue with factions with lower armor, because of the way the auto-resolve works. But that's a different discussion. I hope CA does improve that as well. But all the same, I don't think that they should have this great difference dependent on battle difficulty. Maybe they shouldn't have a difference in terms of how the AI uses its resources based on any kind of difficulty. If it has resources, it should use them to the maximum effect possible. That is my perspective on the matter. Again, I just don't believe that AI behavior should, like the behavior in terms of usage of resources in a war. Because that's the problem, by the way. It's not like the AI is necessarily going to declare wars more if you set the battle difficulty higher. They're going to be using those resources. They're going to attack settlements more if you set that battle difficulty higher. That's the problem. Like, if a faction is at war, you expect them to fully utilize their resources to the maximum extent. And maybe it is a problem trying to balance things out, on all those difficulties, and it's probably not balanced very well. That is just my perspective. I know we are in an era of gaming where, like, you have to have 100 difficulty levels and all that kind of stuff. I have not seen a single game that I have ever played that has handled different difficulty levels well. At least when those difficulty levels affect the way the AI actually behaves. That's generally never worked well. But it does over here. It's one thing to take away resources from the AI on lower difficulties. That's sensical, right? Fairly easy on that. But when you're literally altering the behavior of how it's using its resources based on difficulty, I don't know why it's doing it. If I were to suspect anything, I may even believe that it's not actually affecting its aggressiveness whatsoever, but rather it's affecting their auto-resolve against other factions, and because of that, the AI is more or less aggressive, because it thinks it has a higher chance of success. Incidentally, by the way, it actually makes the AI dumber in some ways. Because if the AI thinks it's going to win a lot more battles, it's going to end up in situations where they're literally Zerg rushing you with armies that have no chance of winning, and you get free experience, free money, and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes. But then you also have the flip side where they're just kind of staring at each other in a game of chicken between each other. But if you declare war, yeah, it's a weird dynamic, really, I would have to say with that. I do hope that does get improved. How it gets improved, I don't know. I'm not a game developer. I just point out these issues as I see them, and I do see this. And it's worth saying, one of my recommendations, if you want to have a more dynamic and interesting campaign, besides the beta that they're going to release, here's what I'd recommend to people. Regardless of what campaign difficulty you're playing on, set the battle difficulty higher. Maybe not very hard. And if you don't want to fight all those battles manually, you can just get some auto-resolve mods. Increase auto-resolve point, minor settlement auto-resolve benefit removal, that's a different discussion. It is a much better thing to do in your campaign. It does make things more interesting. But we'll see what Creative Assembly does do with the changes they're going to be implementing in beta, which I will be testing out tomorrow when it becomes available. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. Stay tuned for more.